Hey there folks, so welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be talking about the newest album, the comeback album from JoJo called Mad Love. We really going to do this? Okay, you all asked for this. So, decades ago, a record executive named Sam Phillips made the statement that if he could find a white man who sang like a black man, he could make $1 million. And he was proven all too right by discovering Elvis Presley. And sure, Elvis was a great singer and made some great music, but let's not pretend he wasn't doing anything that black rock and roll artists hadn't been doing for years by that point. And let's also not pretend this sort of thing has gone away with time. Hell, look at the brief moment of success Iggy Azalea got in 2014. Look how, despite Eminem's wise decision to always play tribute to the greats and his tendency to rip into his own whiteness in hip-hop as a sick sort of joke, there are still so many white boys who consider him one of the greatest rappers of all time. And yeah, before I delve deeper into the genre, I might have been one of them. He's still a great rapper, but he's not my favorite anymore. All this is on my mind a lot when I started getting requests to cover JoJo. And for all those of you who had a brief flicker of recollection before wondering where the hell you know that artist, let's go back to the mid-2000s. Now, keep in mind the Billboard charts were in a weird sort of spot in 2004-2006, especially in the pop scene, which was transitioning from R&B's dominance to whatever the hell might come next. As such, we got the indie rock boom, a brief swell of mid-tempo adult alternative, and in response to this, most pop stars were allowed to develop a little bit more of an edge or texture in order to fit in. But R&B was still mostly dominant, so into the scene comes JoJo, a girl who is my age and yet dropped her debut album in 2004, when she and I were both 14. And you can kind of tell by the way that she was marketed to try and snag that sweet spot between pop and R&B. The teenage white girl who sang like a black girl. Hell, she was signed to Blackground Records, one of the labels behind Aaliyah, and make no mistake, it worked. JoJo's self-titled debut album sold 5 million copies worldwide, and it wasn't because it was good or authentic. Yeah, that's the other unfortunate surprise about revisiting a lot of this material, not just because the production and writing have aged pretty badly, but because I didn't find JoJo that interesting or potent of a singer. She got pipes, but a lot of her material felt really cheaply produced, which didn't help any authenticity questions. So okay, that was the mid-2000s. It's been 10 years, where the hell's JoJo been? Well, after her follow-up couldn't produce a single after Too Little Too Late, she finished high school, and then spent the next several years fighting with Blackground, which later went out of business. Granted, they did give her a shot with Disaster in 2011, where she went full pop, and both Kelly Clarkson and Demi Lovato were doing this sound better even then, even though it sounded like she had finally started to grow into her voice a little bit more. But JoJo is still around. She dropped 2 mixtapes that picked up a little bit of traction, and when she got picked up by Atlantic, she released a few EPs that somehow got her enough traction for a 3rd album. And you know, in a strange sense, it might have helped her to set out the past 10 years of pop music. She wouldn't have fit in with the flashier divas of the early 2010s, and I have to admit, there's a very small part of me that wouldn't mind seeing her explosive vocal style make a bit of a comeback. Furthermore, unlike her previous album, she had the main writing credits across this album, and while you wouldn't find any named producers, this was a chance for a fresh start for her. I'll admit right out of the gates that I was not interested in this at all when I started getting the tidal wave of requests, but the research I did get me intrigued. So how is Mad Love? Well, this was an interesting listen, more than I expected it would be. Not a great or altogether even good listen, let me stress this, but in terms of what could be reasonably expected from JoJo in terms of a sound and content, it's about as good of a comeback as her fans could probably hope for, even if that's not all that good. In terms of pop-leaning R&B, I don't think she's anywhere near close to the best this year. Beyonce has absolutely nothing to worry about. But I guess it's passable, albeit barely. And I can accept that my issues with JoJo as a singer-songwriter would probably persist even if this wasn't a comeback, so I'll give her the slightest bit of credit for making that big return, but not a lot of it, because this is not great. So let's start off with those little persistent nitpicks that I have, shall we? JoJo has gotten a lot of acclaim for her vocals and tremendous range, but I wasn't a huge fan in the 2000s, and that hasn't really changed. Most because of a lack of refinement and technique. You know how a lot of people get irked with Ariana Grande because she doesn't really enunciate much or sounds like she sings through her nose? I don't often agree with that criticism, but when I do hear it, JoJo steps up to showcase it so much worse. And what's frustrating is that she doesn't need to do that either. On songs where she's a little bit more restrained, she tends to play a fair bit more compelling, playing playing for bravado with Remy on F.A.B, for example. But it's not entirely her fault either, because the vocal pickup and production is all over the place on this album in fidelity and quality, and there are way too many tracks like Honest or High Heels or especially Edibles, where not only does she not have the room to breathe properly, it feels like we're not even getting the full extent of her range, honestly just coming through a little bit thin in the low end. And it's not just her either. Fuck Apologies has Wiz Khalifa phoning in his guest verse, and even then it feels kind of muffled around the edges and poorly blended. And sure, she gets songs like I Am with some thicker multi-tracking or stronger backing vocals like on the title track, but not often enough. She could sound a lot better than she does here, and it's not all her. Granted, this takes us to a conversation about the production and instrumentation, and look, it's not all bad. The piano ballad's music and I Am are stripped back enough to be hard to screw up, especially melodically, where music actually has a lot of flourishes in the piano I like, and the underlying guitar against the reverb and bassy snap on F.A.B was pretty solid too. Title track goes for retro soul with guitar and saxophone and heavier backing vocals, and it works pretty well, and the blurry guitar and synth tones against the heavier drums on Like This, they sound pretty good too. Hell, a lot of the grooves on this album aren't that bad. But let's not mince words here. Instrumentally, there is little to nothing on this album that you haven't heard thus far in pop or R&B this year. Trap percussion over melody, pitch-shifted vocal fragments, hints of tropical sounds on Vibe and I Can Only, and all that swamped out in reverb. Although in this case, the reverb often feels selectively applied to some instrumentation or vocal lines rather than the mix as a whole, and that's not a good sign for any sort of cohesion. And the overall quality of these mixes is all over the board. For example, I like the idea on the surface of High Heels, but there's no body in any of these guitars or synth. There's no presence to that song. And that's just counting the songs that are just awkwardly written on a compositional level. Like Honest. It starts off with a fragment of a song before a chunky as hell transition into an entirely different tempo with even more reverb. And you know what? This part of the song would have been fine on its own, but it doesn't work with that preceding piece, which doesn't even match the lyrical themes. It doesn't connect together at all. And I want to forgive more of this, because there are melodies and hooks here I like. F.A.B is probably the best, but Mad Love and Vibe are decent, and there's a part of me that actually kind of likes Fuck Apologies, but the quality of the production really does not come through well at all. But okay, what about the lyrics? Well, again, this album isn't doing anything all that revolutionary when it comes to pop R&B. Love and sex songs, breakup anthems, telling off the haters, and your standard set of self-esteem anthems, where I can't help but just tune out. They aren't interesting. And while I don't mind some of the lyrical flow of songs like Vibe or F.A.B or Like This, dig a little bit deeper and I can't say I'm all that impressed by the poetry. For one, JoJo tends to drop the rhyme scheme a lot more often than she otherwise should for no good reason. And for another, a lot of these songs have stronger ideas than they have execution. The opening track Music, which serves both a tribute to her parents and concept of music itself for saving her, it's an interesting choice to start the album. I wouldn't have started with a piano ballad, but it's also one of the few moments where we actually get distinctive details, whereas both I Can Only and I Am feel both like your standard self-esteem anthem template. It's not all that interesting. Then there are word choices and song choices that just make me scratch my head. I liked how the title track can feel a little bit off-kilter, but then you have the line, "You keep me insane?" Or does the desaturated hammering vibe of Like This work for the sort of sex song that it's trying to be? It feels a little bit too clunky and ponderous for me. Or on Edibles, a song that tries to make Sex When High attractive and really just feels as clumsy with its word choice and metaphors as Sex When High probably is. I mean, seriously, high as Fenway Park? And maybe the belting isn't the best choice either? That's the bigger issue. For as much bombast as her delivery can convey, the production and writing don't flatter that lack of subtlety all that well, which can lead to moments that should hit a lot harder as having a lot of bombast and power just really falling flat for me. In the end, look, congrats to JoJo for getting her career back together, but this comeback gave me very little to work with, and I can't say I liked it all that much. The production's all over the place, the writing is decent at best, the performances tend to be way overdone, and JoJo hasn't really evolved much as a distinctive performer in the course of 10 years. Honestly, I think the only reason I consider this record passable are a few good hooks, Alessia Cara and Remy Ma doing pretty well with their verses, and the fact this record doesn't outright stumble with outright bad songs like, say, Edibles probably is the worst of them. It's not terrible. But even still, it's a very strong 5 out of 10, and even then I feel like I'm being generous. If you're a JoJo fan, you're probably really angry, but you'll probably like this. It's certainly a modern update of her sound if you're looking for that, but otherwise, outside of a few decent pop R&B cuts, you're not getting a lot that's all that unique. Sorry. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Got the poll up here, so I can imagine all of you are kind of irked with this review. I get it, but seriously guys, I wanted to like this, and it just was not interesting to me whatsoever, and a lot of it I've already forgotten. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. My album list is still all the more packed, so I'll be working to get through as much as I can. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.